After his parents' passing, Darren harbored hopes of inheriting a portion of their considerable estate. A lavish mansion in Los Angeles, an impressive fleet of cars, and profitable investments. It all seemed destined to be divided among the heirs. However, when the lawyer began to read the will, it became clear that every last dollar and square foot of their property was bequeathed entirely to his sister Mira. And Darren? He was left with nothing but an old, dilapidated cabin, lost in the vast wilderness of Montana, a place that, by all appearances, hadn't seen a repair in decades. In that moment, Darren felt as though he'd been struck. Mira, clad in a designer coat, sat composed in her chair in the opulent office, and Darren imagined he saw a smug smirk playing on her lips, barely contained. He, on the other hand, couldn't fathom what was happening. His parents' fortune was estimated at $2 million, and he, their own son, was inheriting only a decaying shack, reeking of mold and rotten wood. For 32 years, he had been their flesh and blood, and this was how they saw him. Mira had always been lucky. She was the golden child, the pride of his parents at every family gathering. Impeccable grades, perfect friends, a brilliant career. They saw their future in her. Darren, meanwhile, was relegated to the role of a secondary character, the child who fixed broken furniture and spent his summers at that very cabin. And now, even in death, his parents had managed to remind him of his insufficiency. Darren couldn't accept this state of affairs. The thought of Mira enjoying life in a grand estate, hosting lavish parties in luxurious halls, while he was left with rotting logs and crumbling window frames, stirred a storm of indignation within him. He gripped the cabin key so tightly his knuckles turned white. He refused this meager handout of pity, unwilling for it to serve as a constant reminder of how little he was valued. And then he made a decision. He would go to Montana and set that cabin ablaze. If his parents wanted him to inherit a pile of useless wood, he would turn it into ash. It seemed the only way to exact revenge, to unleash the fury tearing him apart. But when he reached his destination, the biting, icy wind searing his face and the snow crunching under his feet, Darren entered the cabin and froze. Yes, the place was in a deplorable state, but on the stone fireplace lay something he never expected to see: a letter. His father's handwriting, though shaky, was unmistakably his, with "To Darren" inscribed on the envelope. This simple address made him pause, and in that moment, he had no idea that the contents of that letter would turn all his perceptions of his family, his sister, and the inheritance he was so ready to destroy completely upside down. Darren grew up in a family where appearances were paramount. His father, Richard Holt, was a renowned real estate developer in Los Angeles. He had earned a reputation not only for his business acumen, but also for his ability to make an impression. He was a man who could walk into a room and instantly command attention. His mother, Alma, was his perfect counterpart in every way. Beneath her gentle smile lay a sharp mind, and she knew exactly how to play the role of a supportive wife. Together, they forged a life of wealth and influence that many envied. From the outside, it seemed they lived a true fairy tale. But within that fairy tale were cracks, and that's where Darren resided. His older sister, Mira, was the embodiment of everything their parents desired. She possessed polish, ambition, and an ability to charm people effortlessly. From an early age, she knew how to carry herself, as if born for success. Teachers adored her, neighbors admired her, and her parents never tired of proclaiming their pride in her. Darren lost count of how many times he heard the phrase, "Mira, you will achieve great things." He, in turn, remained in the shadows, unnoticed. He was different, not fitting into their world of business handshakes and deals. He enjoyed working with his hands, fixing things, building, repairing broken furniture, or tinkering with engines. He found solace in nature, far from the urban bustle. His happiest childhood memories weren't tied to the Los Angeles mansion, but to the cabin in Montana. He ran through the woods, fished in the streams, and sat by the fireplace, content with only the crackling of the logs. His parents occasionally visited, but it was clear they viewed the place merely as a temporary retreat. For him, it was the only place he truly felt at home. Nevertheless, no matter how hard Darren tried, he could never measure up to Mira in his parents' eyes. Their gaze always conveyed a sense of superiority. When his sister brought home impeccable report cards, They were proudly displayed on the refrigerator as if they were a family achievement. When he, with his own hands, built a treehouse, his parents offered only restrained applause, quickly moving on to something else they deemed more important. His sister's acceptance into a prestigious university was celebrated with a lively party, while his decision to stay in their hometown and pursue carpentry was dismissed as a fleeting hobby, a phase, as they called it. Each of his successes paled in the shadow of her accomplishments. Over the years, this chasm between them only widened. Mira became the embodiment of family pride, moving in the same circles as his father, dressed in expensive clothes and exuding the same confidence. He, meanwhile, became the relative mentioned only in passing, with a slight shrug. The son who hadn't lived up to expectations, who had chosen a path they deemed too simple and unassuming. And though he tried not to show how much it affected him, deep down, resentment gnawed at him, day after day. But then tragedy struck. His parents died suddenly. A fatal car accident ended their lives one evening. The shock was so profound that he could barely comprehend what had happened. Despite all the past grievances and estrangement, they were still his parents. In secret, he hoped their passing would bring him closer to Mira, that shared grief would equalize their positions. But hope turned to bitterness on the day the will was read. He would never forget that office, the leather chairs, the scent of polished wood, the lawyer calmly turning pages. Every line he read pierced his heart like a knife. Mira was to inherit the Los Angeles estate, valued at $4.2 million, as well as all his father's investments and his mother's jewelry. When the lawyer turned to him, his tone softened, as if apologetic. "To Darren Holt," he read, "we leave the cabin in Montana." Silence fell in the room. He sat, thunderstruck, gripping the arms of the chair, waiting for more. There had to be something else. Money, stocks, at least a car. But there was nothing, only the cabin. He remembered turning to Mira. A condescending smile played on her lips, the same one she always displayed when she won, as if it were a competition and she had once again emerged victorious. "They probably knew I was ready for such responsibility," she said softly. "You always loved that cabin, Darren. Perhaps they thought it suited you better." Her words wounded him more deeply than the lawyer's. He wanted to scream, to remind her how he had spent his entire life fruitlessly trying to earn the approval that came so easily to her. But instead, he sat, trembling, a mixture of humiliation and rage churning in his chest. He left the office feeling more insignificant than ever. His parents were gone, but even in death they had managed to send him the same message as always. Mira was more important, Mira was worthy, and he was not. The anger grew until it consumed him entirely. The thought of Mira presiding over the estate, redecorating the rooms where he had played as a child, hosting parties under the same roof where he once sat hoping for parental attention, made him sick to his stomach. And the cabin, that dilapidated structure in the wilderness, seemed like a mockery, a final insult directed at him. And he made a decision. If the cabin was all he was worth, he would destroy it. He would drive to Montana, douse the wooden floors with gasoline, and strike a match. He would not allow this shack to become a perpetual reminder of how little his parents had valued him. Such was his plan. As he got into his truck and began the long drive north, the road to Montana seemed endless. Snow hammered against the windshield, and the wipers barely kept up. The truck's heater blasted at full power, but the cold seemed to permeate everything. Each mile he drove gave him more time to think, and the more he thought, the stronger his fury grew. He imagined Mira sipping wine in the Los Angeles estate, lounging by the pool that once served as the backdrop for their family barbecues, and laughing with friends about how she had inherited everything. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white, and he vowed to erase from the face of the earth the only thing his parents had thrown at him like scraps from a table. When he finally reached the cabin, its appearance only intensified his rage. The roof sagged under the weight of the snow, the porch listed precariously, and the wood was dark with rot. Shutters flapped against the windows in the howling wind. It looked abandoned, forgotten, just as he had always felt in his childhood. Inside Darren, anger seethed, born not from the inheritance, but from a deep-seated resentment that had tormented his soul since youth. The insult inflicted upon him burned hotter than the icy air piercing his body. With each crunching step on the snow, broken only by the howling wind, childhood memories flooded in, uninvited guests. Before his eyes, scenes emerged, his father teaching him the art of chopping wood, his mother humming melodies by the old stove, himself sitting on the porch with a fishing rod that seemed bigger than he was. These moments should have warmed his heart, but instead, they only highlighted a gaping emptiness. Why, if these memories held any value, had his parents left everything to Mira and only this fragment of the past to him? Darren pushed these thoughts aside and decided to act. In the bed of his truck waited 2 cans of gasoline and a box of matches, the tools of his simple yet destructive plan. He intended to douse the floors with gasoline, strike a match, and watch as the cabin, a witness to his childhood, turned to ash. It seemed the only way to regain control, to assert his refusal to carry the burden of this resentment for the rest of his days. Struggling to lift the cans, Darren headed towards the creaking steps, the wood groaning under his weight. The front door first jammed, then gave way with a sharp crack, letting him inside. The cold in the house felt even more piercing than outside. Dust covered the furniture in a thick layer, and the fireplace, once a lively hearth, now gaped dark and lifeless, shrouded in soot and cobwebs. The damp smell of old wood filled his nostrils. Darren set the cans on the floor and looked around, imagining the flames engulfing the walls, the roof collapsing, and with it, the insult disappearing. But suddenly, something unusual caught his attention. On the stone fireplace, just above the mantel, lay a yellowed envelope. The handwriting, however, was unmistakably his father's, bold and slightly uneven. On the front of the envelope were 2 words, "To Darren." Darren's heart stopped. His hands, already reaching for the gasoline, dropped. He stared at the envelope, his chest tightening with conflicting emotions. Was this a final apology, a new form of insult, or simply instructions on how to repair a leaking roof? His father was a man of few words, and the thought that he had left something specifically for him stirred confusion in Darren's soul. Stepping forward, he took the envelope. The tape tore from the stone with a crackle. Darren paused for a moment, weighing the envelope in his hand. His father had addressed it specifically to him, not to Mira, not to both of them, but only to him. The very parents who, he thought, had left him with nothing, had left him something else, something hidden in this place he was about to destroy. Running his finger under the flap, he tore open the envelope and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting seemed shaky, but the words were clear. "My son," the letter began. Darren sank into a dusty armchair by the cold fireplace and began to read. His father wrote that he and Mira had always been different people. Mira, he said, belonged to the world of business and society, while Darren belonged to the forests, the land, the quiet places most people overlooked. He explained that the estate would go to Mira because she would be able to manage the wealth and public life associated with it. But for Darren, his father wrote, something greater was intended. The letter contained instructions. Behind the cabin, his father wrote, there is a path leading into the forest. After half a mile, you will see an oak with a scar on its bark. Under that tree, he said, you will find the truth of my inheritance. What you discover there belongs only to you. This is what I wanted you to have, his father concluded. Trust me, Darren, you will understand. By the time Darren finished reading, his hands were trembling. The gasoline can stood untouched by the door, and the box of matches still lay in his coat pocket. The fire he had intended to light had lost all meaning. Instead, another fire ignited in Darren's soul, fueled by curiosity and bewilderment. His father had never spoken to him this way in life. Darren had always believed that his father had never truly seen him, understood him, or valued his essence. But these words suggested otherwise. He looked at the back door, beyond which stretched the snow-covered forest. His father wanted him to find something there, something meant only for him. Placing the letter on the mantelpiece, Darren tightened his coat and stepped back outside. The cold hit him with renewed force, but he paid it no mind. Rounding the shed, he found an old shovel leaning against the wall. It was rusty and worn, but sturdy enough. With the shovel in one hand and a flashlight in the other, Darren headed into the forest. He plunged deeper into the forest. Each step echoed with a distinct crunch under his boots, as if disturbing the fragile silence of the winter realm. Plumes of frosty breath billowed into the air, and his mind was filled with questions. What was hidden in the depths of this earth? Why had his father kept this secret from Mira? And why, only on his deathbed, had he decided to reveal it to him? The flashlight illuminated only a narrow strip of the trail, leading deeper into the woods. The trees seemed darker than he remembered, and the biting cold seeped through his gloves, but he pressed on. His father's words persistently echoed in his head, guiding his way. Half a mile in. Soon, his gaze caught the familiar silhouette of an oak tree. The mighty tree bore a deep scar on its bark, like a memory of an ancient storm. Without hesitation, he plunged the shovel into the frozen ground, beginning to dig. Each strike sent a dull ache through his hands. The earth resisted, as if bound by eternal cold. His breathing grew heavier, and his gloves became damp with sweat, but he didn't give up. Whatever lay hidden in this ground, it was meant for him, and he was determined to uncover this secret. The first strike of the shovel against the frozen earth echoed like a gunshot in the forest's silence. The blade merely ricocheted off the hard surface, sending a sharp pain through his hands. Gritting his teeth, he struck again. The frozen soil refused to yield, but he continued to work relentlessly. His father's dying letter had ignited an unquenchable fire in his soul. Again and again the shovel plunged into the earth, tearing it apart. Heavy breaths escaped his chest, turning into white clouds against the dark forest. The light from the flashlight, strapped to a tree branch, cast strange shadows, as if the forest itself were watching his actions. The deeper he dug, the stronger his doubts became. The anger, long suppressed, began to resurface. Thoughts of a cruel joke, another reminder that he had always been different, not good enough, flickered through his mind. But with each shovel stroke, another part of his soul grew, believing that this could be true. His father had chosen him, not Mira. Him. After endless effort, he finally broke through the top layer of frozen earth. The shovel went deeper, and this small victory gave him new strength. He dug faster and faster, despite the pain in his shoulders and his sweat-soaked gloves. The sound of the shovel hitting roots and rocks echoed through the forest, but the thought of what awaited him kept him from stopping. Pausing to catch his breath, he wiped the sweat from his brow. The words from the letter came back to him. What you find there belongs only to you. This is what I wanted you to have. For the first time in many years, he felt his father speaking directly to him, not to Mira or to the ideal image of the family. Gathering his strength, he plunged the shovel into the ground again, and it struck something hard. The sound was different, not the dull thud of a rock, but a muffled metallic clang. His heart pounded wildly in his chest. Dropping to his knees, he began to clear away the earth with his hands until his fingers touched something cold and hard. Beneath the layer of soil and tangled roots lay the edge of a metal chest. His pulse quickened as he freed the chest from the earth, inch by inch, until its rusty but intact form appeared. A tremor ran through his body. With difficulty, he gripped the edges and tried to pull the chest out, but it wouldn't budge. Taking the shovel, he continued digging, freeing the chest inch by inch, until finally he could heave it to the surface. Gasping for breath, he leaned back onto the snow, staring at the box that had waited for him for so long. For a moment, he froze, unable to move. His hands trembled as he reached for the latch. An image of Mira, confident in her victory, and the years spent doubting whether his father truly saw him, flashed through his mind, and here he was, in the forests of Montana, before a chest left to him as an inheritance. In the impenetrable depths of the forest, embraced by oblivion, his gaze fell upon the sought-after object. The latch yielded with a dull creak, granting access to the sacred contents. Inside, like precious relics, lay stacks of papers wrapped in oilcloth, protecting them from the relentless march of time and the whims of the elements. A tremor ran through his hands as he extracted one and unfolded it. It was a diary, penned in his father's familiar handwriting. Pages flipped before his eyes, words and phrases intertwining into a narrative about the land, about the decision to acquire thousands of acres around the humble cabin, about the hopes placed on its future, and about him, his son. You are always most alive here, one page read. This land reflects your spirit. It needs someone to love it for what it is, not to carve it up for profit, and that someone is you. Tears stung his eyes, breaking through the veil of time. His father hadn't been blind. He had seen his true essence, understood him more deeply than he himself had ever suspected. The cabin, not an insult, but a gateway to something greater. Deeper in the chest, he found maps, legal documents, and finally, a deed. His name was clearly printed. The land belonged to him, all of it. The cabin was not merely an abandoned shack, but the heart of a legacy, hidden and preserved by his father exclusively for him. The realization hit him like an avalanche. Mira had inherited the estate and fortune, but he had been given something different, something more valuable, alive. His parents hadn't forgotten him. They trusted him. Sitting in the snow, with the diary on his lap and the chest heavy with his father's words, he no longer felt rejected for the first time since the will was read. He felt chosen. The anger that had brought him here began to give way to a more enduring and profound feeling, a sense of belonging, of responsibility. The land stretched around him, silent beneath its snowy blanket, awaiting his decision. The chest was closed, the shovel gripped in his hand. The night air bit at his skin, but it no longer felt hostile. His father had led him here with his letter, and now he understood why. His gaze drifted to the cabin's flickering light through the trees. The plan to burn it had dissipated, replaced by a new intention, unexpected and thrilling. He would rebuild, restore, honor the legacy his father had left, not out of anger but out of love. That night, kneeling in the snow beside the mighty oak, he crossed an invisible line of no return. Life had changed. The inheritance was no longer a burden, but a calling. The chest was heavier than he had anticipated. Dragging it back to the cabin felt like carrying the entire weight of his past. His arms ached, his legs trembled, but he refused to stop. Reaching the porch, he was soaked with sweat, his gloves frozen stiff. Yanking open the door, he hauled the chest inside and placed it before the fireplace. For a moment, he just stood, gazing at it. The flashlight beam glided over the iron bands that secured it. The chest had been buried for years, perhaps decades, awaiting its moment. The gasoline can still stood by the door, a silent reminder of the plan he had abandoned. The thought of how close he had come to destroying the cabin, to destroying the place that held the truth, brought a bitter smile to his lips. Sinking to the floor, he opened the chest again. The papers were meticulously wrapped in oilcloth, protecting them from moisture and decay. Lifting the first bundle, he unfolded it with trembling hands. His father's diaries spilled onto the floor, their leather covers cracked with age. Opening one at random, he immersed himself in the familiar handwriting. The earliest entries were made many years ago. His father wrote about buying the land piece by piece, quietly, telling no one. He described his love for the wilderness, for its untouched beauty, which reminded him of his childhood in a small town, far from the city's hustle and bustle. He wrote about his desire to preserve something real in a world obsessed with profit. Turning a page, he froze. A photograph was affixed to it. It showed him, a small boy, sitting on the porch of that very cabin, fishing rod in hand, almost too heavy for his childish grip. The caption read, "Darren at his happiest. This is where he belongs." He had to put the diary down, his eyes stinging with tears. All these years, he had believed his father didn't see him, that he valued only Mira and her brilliant successes. But here was the proof. His father had seen him, watched him all this time. And not just watched, but understood him in a way he had never let on. It turned out the old chest held far more than just dusty inherited items. Inside, he found a stack of maps, lovingly drawn and crisscrossed with boundaries, like a treasure. These maps meticulously depicted thousands of acres of wilderness surrounding the secluded cabin. Streams, winding hills, dense forests, everything was carefully documented with astonishing precision. At the bottom of one map, a note was visible, written in his father's familiar hand. The land must remain whole for Darren. Following that was a deed legally executed, with Darren's name clearly printed, along with signatures and seals. His father had transferred all rights to this land to him long before his passing. This land was rightfully his. Its value surpassed even the lavish Los Angeles estate, perhaps by double. But it wasn't about the money. Far more significant was what this land represented. It wasn't just wealth to boast about or sell. It was a legacy, an immense responsibility his father had entrusted specifically to him. Beneath the legal documents, he discovered more diaries. These were different from the previous ones. They were not about land or money, but about him personally, about Darren. Page after page, his father described their time together at the cabin. He recalled Darren catching his first fish on his own, the pride that lit up his face when he built a fire without help, how he would spend hours in the woods and return with exciting tales of new trails found. His father wrote that nowhere did Darren seem as happy as he did here. "You were not made for city lights," one entry read. "Your place is under open skies and amidst quiet mornings. This place is your true inheritance, because it is you." Darren pressed his hand to the page, his chest tightening with emotion. For years he had carried anger and resentment within him, like a heavy stone, believing he was unloved, unwanted, and unseen. But in this moment, reading his father's words, he realized how profoundly mistaken he had been. His father had always seen him, understood him better than anyone else. The room blurred before his eyes as tears welled up. He pictured Mira living in luxury in her mansion, and himself here, surrounded by snow and silence, holding his father's words. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel deprived. On the contrary, he felt chosen. In the chest, he found another envelope, hidden beneath the diaries. Darren carefully opened it. Inside lay a short note written in his father's hand. "Darren, if you are reading this, you have found what I left for you. I know you were angry with me in life, and I don't blame you for it. I didn't always say the right things, and I know I made you feel forgotten, but you were never forgotten. This land is yours because you are the only one I trust to protect it. Use it for good, make it your home, and know that I was always proud of you." He reread the note twice, then thrice, until the words began to blur before his eyes. His body trembled under the weight of the surging emotions. The anger he had carried since the reading of the will seemed to evaporate, replaced by something deeper and more enduring, gratitude and peace. He leaned back against the fireplace and closed his eyes. He remembered how close he had been to striking a match and watching this place turn to ashes. But instead, he had discovered the truth. His father had left him nothing. He had left him everything that truly mattered. As the firelight flickered on the walls, Darren realized his life would never be the same. The cabin ceased to be a symbol of rejection. It became the beginning of something much greater. It no longer seemed like a place of decay, even with its sagging roof and drafts. It felt alive, breathing. The chest with diaries and documents stood by the fireplace, and Darren constantly revisited it. Every evening, he lit a fire, settled into the armchair, and read his father's words. The diaries were more than just instructions about the land. They were a window into his soul. His father wrote about his hopes, his mistakes, and the love he never spoke aloud. Darren began to see his parents in a new light. His mother's voice also echoed in the diary pages, in his father's small notes about her humming while he explored the forest, or how she worried he would go too far, but always smiled when he returned with new stories. For years, he had convinced himself that they valued Mira more than him. But now he had proof that although they loved them differently, their love was equally profound. The anger that had once consumed him vanished without a trace. In its place, a purpose emerged. He stopped seeing the cabin as a burden and began to perceive it as the heart of something much larger. Every morning he woke up and watched the snow swirl outside the window, no longer feeling cheated by his inheritance. He felt entrusted with something sacred. He began the slow process of restoring the cabin. At first it was basic work, patching leaks, fixing broken steps, sealing cracks in the walls. But as the weeks passed, he realized the work was not merely physical. Every nail hammered, every board replaced felt like mending parts of his own soul. The boy who once fished in the stream and built fires with his own hands still lived within him, and his father knew it. He had given him back not just the land, but himself. He often pondered Mira, his sister. The question constantly arose in his mind: would she ever grasp the depth of the decision their parents had made? She had been given the luxurious mansion, vast wealth, a life filled with riches and high social status. But what had been bestowed upon him could not be measured in monetary units. It was measured in acres of untouched wilderness, in the melodic rustle of the wind playing through the treetops, in the invaluable legacy of trust passed down from his father. Now, he had no need to prove anything to his sister. For the first time in his life, he felt satisfied, realizing that he possessed exactly what fate had intended for him. The most important lesson he learned from everything that happened turned out to be surprisingly simple. Inheritance is not always measured in monetary value. Sometimes, it lies in finding what perfectly suits your soul, even if it seems insignificant at first glance. His parents saw his true essence, even when he doubted it himself. They chose a different path for him, thereby giving him something more than just wealth. They filled his life with meaning. One evening, sitting by the fireplace and leafing through the old diary that described the very oak tree under which he had unearthed the ancient chest, he realized that his life had irrevocably changed. The cabin was no longer a symbol of rejection and disapproval. Now, it was his home, a place where he could build his life, a place he was meant to protect. The land around the cabin would remain untouched, as his father had wished, and he would be its guardian. He was not the forgotten son. He was the son who was trusted implicitly, and that trust would guide him throughout his life. If you have read this story to the end, he expresses his sincere gratitude. This narrative is not just about money or material inheritance. It is about how he discovered his true self and finally realized how deeply he was loved, even when he didn't perceive it.